I am not against the natural resources, but what do you mean about, please, about synthetic CBD? Progress is progress. So applications of pure products, CBC, can be on the way.
Was the question about synthetic CBD? Yes, what we think about it.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to grow natural CBD that the need for synthetic versions is kind of artificial.
I mentioned it already. Synthetic versus natural. Natural is every time minus CBD in the nature. Synthetic, to prepare minus pure, it's not easy because they usually use terpene from which they start to synthesize, and this terpene never is only minus, there is about 5% plus. So when you synthesize CBD, you will have CBD, when you analyze it, it will be 99.9% pure. Chemically, but not optically. Optically there will be 5% plus CBD. And this we checked, CBD and derivatives, this bind to cannabinoid receptors. Plus, not minus. So, if you can guarantee that you start from only 100% pure minus products, then your result will be the same CBD as in the nature.
Dobrý den, já jsem se chtěla zeptat, jaký máte zkušenosti CBD kapky a epilepsie. Já jsem epileptik, můj stav se zhoršuje, mívám častější záchvaty. Zkušenosti s marihuanou ani s kanabinoidama nemám. Mám z toho trošičku obavy. Moje otázka zní, chtěla bych se do toho vrhnout. Je to dobré konzultovat, mít u toho někoho, nebo můžu sama si prostě koupit tady kapičky, prostě 5%, 10, 20, čím byste třeba začali a zda teda na tu epilepsii jsou pozitivnější a pozitivnější účinky, nebo ne?
We have done study on epilepsy, I think 4 years or 5 years ago, together with Professor Neubauer from Pediatric Clinic in Ljubljana and Dr. Hornby from Canada. We took 10 kids with pharmacoresistant epilepsy, and very soon the 50% of kids were completely without seizures, and most of the others, just one, didn't react actually. Professor Neubauer had a lecture on our conference and also last week on the fair Nature and Health in Ljubljana, and he recommends start low dose, like 1 milligram per kilo of body weight, and you can increase up to 10 or 20 milligrams per kilo of body weight. But his experience is that when you turn over 10 milligrams per kilo of body weight, usually something is wrong and maybe you should switch over to THC. Also his experience is that if CBD doesn't work, there is a big chance that THC will help. So you have to play a lot, and I don't know what are you afraid of. Nobody died of cannabis yet, and really there is no side effects, especially from CBD.
One thing you have to know about CBD is that not all CBD oils are created the same. You have to know the strength of that CBD oil. You could have a milligram of something and have it be a 10% strength or 62 or 75% strength. So you need to know what you're working with. And again, when CBD doesn't work, THCA does work sometimes. And so that's it's not decarboxylated THC. And a lot of times THC will work. So you have to experiment and again, be your own advocate or your child's advocate and work until you figure out what works for you.
There's a very high profile case in the United States of a little girl named Nova Lee who was born with part of her brain missing. They moved to Colorado and they started her on CBD. it just made it worse. She had hundreds and hundreds of seizures a day. They got her on THC and she goes months without seizures. So again, it's not a one size fits all. You've got to kind of play with it and see what's right for you.
I personally like to have NCBD and DHC because of my anxiety. I'd like to know what you think about CBD for the breast cancer. The doctor from Spain, Gonzalez or something like that, you know, there are studies, they said for the brain cancer, for the brain, THC, for the breast, CBD. So there is not always just about THC, and I had more questions, but let's answer that.
From our experience, even breast cancer patients should be using high THC oils, mainly, again, if they want to add CBD as a supplement, they can, why not? But you do need the high THC. Unfortunately, that scientific hypothesis of how CBD is better than THC for cancer has murdered many women already. We know of hundreds of women who tried CBD oils for their cancer and they died because it did not have the power. You know, so again, CBD, great, lovely, you know, but as a supplement, second grade, you know.
I want to answer also, still you get your microphone, about breast cancer and cancer as well, about the high THC that you all the time talk about. Because breast cancer is spreading all over the body. If you don't take high THC, your body is completely with cancer all over. So, high THC.
Well, breast cancers are not all the same either. You have different positivities to different hormones with some of them. And while THC works very well with most breast cancers, some of them it's going to make worse. One of my first people who I worked with had hormone-sensitive breast cancer, and she had chemotherapy. And we noticed her tumors grew. And later on, Bob figured out what was going on, that when you have chemotherapy, it changes you from a sugar burner and it kills off those cells, but sometimes the fat-burning cells are left and they become like supercells. So that's when you want to use CBD and THC. And I'll let Bob talk about that more, but sometimes it's not all one size fits all. And you really do have to be very, very careful with what you do with those.
Unfortunately, we don't do the right medical tests, because what we really should be doing is determining, for example, with the estrogen receptor, where the estrogen receptor is. Is it where it belongs normally, or is it in a different place? Because depending on whether it's fat or sugar burning, it's in different places. I agree with everybody else. You need the high THC 100%. You have to have the THC, because that's what's going to shut down the system, but meaning the sugar burning. But the problem is that people are very paranoid often about getting stoned. They don't increment the dose slow and do it that way. Or what so many of you guys here, and we're doing more and more in the States now, are the suppositories. And most people find them to be, if anything, pleasant. So, so you know, I would certainly say that take as much THC as you possibly can. And what I recommend is that you can shut down a variety of these escape pathways that cells use in order to not overload with free radicals. So for example, glucosamine sulfate shuts down aerobic glycolysis. And ECGC, the active ingredient in green tea, shuts down the glutamine pathway. So by combining different nutraceuticals, you can regulate these metabolic pathways. The other thing that we have had a number of successes with is you want to overload the cells with free radicals. And the way to do that in a systemic way is to take high doses of intravenous vitamin C for like 10 days in a row. You know, take your body weight in vitamin C instead of kilograms and grams, and you get those shots. And what it does is it interacts with, you know, with iron in your blood and generates free radicals. If I had cancer again, if I had something like that, I would definitely take that approach, but again, it's caused by chemo, which selects for those S-phase cells that aren't going to die. and they either go senescent for 10 or 20 years, or they don't go senescent for that long, and they screw you one way or the other, and they're typically metabolically flexible and very, very difficult to kill.
I have a question in regards to exactly CBD and CBG, because they are mostly, there are articles which are saying that they are very good for hypertension. And what do you think about that? How to cure heavy hypertension?
For is high blood pressure?
Yes.
High THC oils. Again, the question is, what is a CBD oil? CBD oil usually is simply a tincture made from industrial hemp or some other varieties. So even in the CBD oil, you will have microdose of THC. For some people, even that can be enough. It can relieve their tension. It can take down their blood pressure. For some, from my experience, know that when my blood pressure goes too high, half a gram of high THC, I'm okay. Also, again, it's individual. I'm a big proponent of high doses of high THC.
I understand that it's THC, but then how to dose that in order to not
You start with 1 to 5 milligrams of THC. Whatever you buy, then you do the calculation how much that could be. That's generally how to start consuming cannabis. Ideally, it would be 1 to 5 milligrams of THC. And another thing we did not mention for high blood pressure, suppositories are great. So you buy some CBD oil, mix it with cocoa butter, put it in suppository forms, and
I'm taking CBD, and as well when I'm smoking, it's very much I'm very sensitive to THC, so I'm very immediately I'm very high. So it's it's great, but I need to work as well to buy those things. So it's impossible to work when I'm constantly high. So it's.
Be happy, woman. I would like to be high.
And one of my daughters also is extremely sensitive to CBD. So there's definitely a sexual dimorphism that happens with CBD. It may be that the receptor is modified hormonally, because there's so many variations, there's so many layers of control that create, our gestalt at any one instant. And most men do not get stoned on CBD. At the time my son was 11, and he took a number of them because of an injury and never got high, but certainly benefited from it. So I said to my wife, here, take it. I thought we tested it on the kid, and I was in trouble.
I'm a big advocate for THC as well, but actually I have a question more specifically about CBD and some of the claims I've seen and some of the products at this event. And one of them that I'm struggling to understand is sort of water-soluble CBD, nanotechnology. Some of the claims I've seen state this is 5 times more bioavailable, right? So I might question that claim and say, so how do you test that? How do you come up with this claim? And I'm just struggling to understand nanotechnology. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Look, nanotechnology. This is very popular because dream of anybody who works with cannabis on the market, they want CBD soluble. They want it in the water, they want it in alcoholic beverages. Simply, CBD in water is insoluble. You can use nanotechnology, so it's said that availability is better after you use nanotechnology. But CBD is CBD, It depends who are you, what is your disease, and how much you take. So.
They don't really do proper, from what I understand, maybe I'm wrong, bioavailability studies. What they look is how much CBD or whatever they're encapsulating in with a nano cage. They look at how much of that's in the blood. But that doesn't mean it's getting into the cells better. For example, it might even not interact with the receptors in the same way. So I don't know any of those answers, but I certainly have questions. And all it does is increase the cost.
Look, it's scientifically proved that bioavailability of cannabinoids per rectum with suppositories is 0. It was found nothing in blood, no cannabinoids, no metabolites of cannabinoids. But experience of patient, it works.
With that nice THC.
Because if you inject cannabinoids directly to the blood, it's 100% availability. So.
Just going back to breast cancer, I have a friend with HER2 estrogen-fed breast cancer, and she's got concerns about using high THC. She does use it, but it's just getting the ratios right with CBD. Is it better to do, say, a 3:1 CBD to THC? Or is high THC with minimum CBD still safe for hormone-driven cancers? Not just breast cancer, but hormone-driven cancers in general.
It's really hard to say. Really think of high THC oils, which ideally would be substances with about 90-95% THC, which means that most people will never or will not be able to produce it, because most oils, as Božo can confirm, are 50, 60, sometimes 70% THC, etc. You know? So even if someone wants to use CBD oils and pay the money for it, that's totally up to them. They should do the calculation and make sure that they get at least something like half a gram, 500 milligrams of THC in their bodies. That's about the dose you were taking, about half a gram, right? The general recommendation that we have now, or from observations from what we've seen, the target dose should be somewhere between 500 milligrams and 3,000 milligrams per day of THC. How much CBD someone takes in addition to that, how much CBG, CBN, and whatever else is up to them. But the main line of defense that we've seen so far, in most cases, I think, is really high THC oils, somewhere in the 500 to 3,000 milligram a day range. You know? So even whatever type of cancer you get, whatever research from scientists you find, just, you know, and use high THC.
Well, the whole breast cancer issue, unfortunately, is all over the map. In my experience working with hundreds and hundreds of women with breast cancer, triple negative breast cancer is pretty easy breezy, high THC. I have known women with estrogen, progesterone, HER2 negative, but estrogen and progesterone positive cancers that have cleared breast cancer with high THC. I've had others who haven't. So it's so individual. I tend to tell women, particularly with the hormone-driven ones, do the high THC absolutely. If you want to throw CBD in, by all means do. Cover all your bases.
One thing that we do like to mention is you could do them separately, a few hours apart, and that way you get the benefits of both. And you don't want to be blocking that CB1 receptor, with the CBD, so do them separately if it's one of the more general ones. But the triple positive ones are the ones that we find tricky, and you really have to see how your body reacts and work with it.
The CB1 receptor is going to be dominant in, for example, the brain normally, or CB1 receptor, right? Because it's an electron transport system. And most cancers are starting out where they're already shutting down that aspect in order to use the aerobic glycolysis, because they're already overloading with free radicals. So shutting down CB1 is not what's killing your cancers. It's CB2 and turning on fat burning everywhere. And wherever you have any kind of imbalance, CB2 appears. So any illness that you have is ultimately going to show CB2 receptors, because any illness ultimately generates that redox imbalance. So this psoriasis that I had for years and years and years, when I used THC containing extract, it definitely was significantly better than when I used nothing. But when I totally eliminated THC and only used the CBD extract, especially when combined with vitamin D, that worked perfectly. But eventually, with a nutritional change, everything totally went away. But the THC actually fed the cell division for my psoriasis. And that's very much of a parallel of what can happen. Low dose THC. If you're just puffing and you got a breast cancer of the wrong type, you actually could be supporting the cancer.